Well, welcome everybody. I'm Michael Washburn. I'm the preservation director at Seed Savers Exchange. Um, and I have the pleasure of being here with George McLaughlin Jr. Now, George has a long academic and professional career in theology, but he's been out in the garden and digging around in that soil for most of his life since he was a young child. Now, George is one of Seed Savers Exchange's most active members and has been involved with our work at Seed Savers Exchange for around 30 years. His first listings to the exchange came in about 1985, where he and his wife Jerreth have offered over 130 varieties to that community. In addition, George has donated around 60 accessions to Seed Savers Exchange Seed Bank, and George also contributes as a renew grower, helping Seed Savers Exchange at its core by regenerating seeds in the seed bank so we can make them available to the public. George, it's my great pleasure to be with you here today to share your amazing story, to hear about your journey and contributions as a longtime seed saver and steward of many of our cherished heritage varieties. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
So I have so I'm going to kind of start in the beginning and get you to conjure up maybe your first experience or one of your earliest experiences around gardening. And I know that it has something to do with a sandbox and a watermelon. If you wouldn't mind sharing that with me.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I've mentioned that a couple of times in correspondence. I was raised in a gardening family. My dad was the main gardener, but my mom was out there as much as she could, and then later on she was the cook and canner mainly, though they worked together on canning a lot. And one of my earliest memories was, besides the fact that my dad had all these gardens all over our little half acre in New Jersey where I was living up until I was 6, um, he built me a sandbox, and I had my little trucks in the sandbox and shovels and all that. And one day my mom carried out a slice of watermelon for me, handed it to me, and told me I could have watermelon while I played. And I happily ate it. And being, probably 4 years old, I scattered seeds everywhere. And a few weeks later, my dad took me out and showed me where I had a watermelon growing in the sandbox. And being the way he was, he suggested that we take care of it. So for the rest of the summer, I stopped digging in the sandbox and went out and visited my watermelon. And it didn't quite get as ripe as we would have liked by frost, but it was good enough, and it was, in my opinion, the best watermelon in the whole world. Um, and so that was an introduction to gardening for me, or for me to garden.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's kind of amazing, you take a kind of a chance situation like that and look what came out of it.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
thought that was pretty neat the first time I ran across that story.
yeah, yeah.
So, kind of going forward, and I might be skipping a few years, so you can fill in some blanks if I go too far. But yeah, I guess I'm already skipping to college, going from childhood straight into college. But there was a Dr. Fowler
Yes.
that played a role in your.
Fowler was my Old Testament professor in seminary, and he was a very unique fellow. I had a great sense of humor, very informal in class. And I forget how it came up, but I mentioned to him that I was really interested in unusual, back then everything was heirlooms if it was that way, heirlooms.
Mhm.
And and he looked at me and he says, "Well, I was representing the seminary on the West Coast, and some of the supporters found out I liked to garden, and they gave me some beans that their ancestor had carried over the Oregon Trail. And they still have the seed. I think they were in California, but it was over the Oregon Trail. And he said, I'll see if I can find them." So a few weeks later, we're in chapel. I forget what day of the morning, what day of the week, and I get a tap on my shoulder, and Dr. Fowler's sitting behind me with a big smile, and he hands me a little bag of these little dark brown bean seeds. And he says, "This is it. This is the bean." And I was, of course, in contact with him for several years after that while I was in school. And so I asked him finally when it occurred to me, well, what did they call them? And he had no idea.
Mhm.
They may not have had a name for them. A lot of people don't when they have their own little heirloom. But anyway, so when I finally listed it in Seed Savers, I called it Fowler after Don Fowler, Fowler bush bean, a very unique bean because of its ever-bearing qualities and insect resistance.
Yeah. And so that bean, is that a good snap bean?
Yeah, it's a good snap bean. I like it. I haven't grown it much in Oklahoma,
Hmm.
um, though it would make it here. I just haven't grown it much, but it's a good bean by most people's standards. It's a great bean.
Hmm.
Um, it's one of two bush beans that I know that doesn't have a shut-off switch. The only way it's going to stop setting pods is it's got to get hit by too much drought or frost.
Mm.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
it just keeps setting pods. So that's really excellent for a bush bean, a true bush bean.
Well, yeah. And I mean, if you're going to go ahead and save something, you might as well save something that's going to feed the family or at least taste good, right?
Yeah, and interestingly, it's a bush bean
Yeah.
because most of the older varieties I encounter are usually pole or half runner.
Yeah.
It's a true bush bean.
Yeah. Well, so after your time with Dr. Fowler and there, you and Jerreth took a stroll to Mexico, spent some time down there. I know that was quite of an experience. Do you mind sharing about that experience?
Sure. We trained, both of us trained to do missions work. And uh, part of our time in Mexico, I was encouraging small churches out in the remote hills of the state of Puebla, or well, five different states. Um, and then probably a little more than half the time, about 8.5 years, we were at a Bible Institute on the high plateau, the Bajío, in the state of Hidalgo. And I didn't travel as much, but I had students that would come in, and I did get to travel some. Um, so we had extensive exposure to indigenous people and rural people. That was the specialty, the special focus of our mission, to minister to those people because they have a very different culture, different needs, especially in a Bible institute. You got to have a certain environment so that they thrive and don't get picked on, because in Mexican culture, um, indigenous, no matter what they say, indigenous tends to be looked down upon and treated as inferior. So that's what we did, and learned an awful lot. And I didn't try, but I just like plants and seeds. And so wherever I would travel, or whoever I would meet, if they showed me something or if I ran into something, I'd ask them about, the plants or the whatever they were growing. And and so over the years, I kept running into a lot of varieties, some of which I think never made it because they just simply couldn't handle being as far north
Mm.
as even Oklahoma. They
Yeah.
have to be in the south, way south, maybe the southern tip of Florida.
Hmm.
And I shipped a bunch of that stuff up to Decorah, and I doubt it made it. But
Hmm.
Glenn Drowns took a corn that I got in the state of Puebla in a high cold rainforest, and he planted it in Iowa, and he told me that it started to tassel when it got 18 feet tall, and then it got killed by frost. It was like 20 feet tall, but it
Wow.
hadn't made any seed yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Learned a lot about environment and day length and how
Hmm.
it influences crops. So
Hmm. So then after that, y'all settled in Oklahoma. And why did you settle in Oklahoma?
we would take our family vacation going and coming, and we would even meet my in-laws sometimes at a place called Gore, Oklahoma, and take an extra week. And so the kids grew up with the idea Oklahoma is the best place in the world. we had the best time in Oklahoma. So when we were coming back, we first landed in New Jersey where I grew up, and that they've told me before, going back to where the first place you touch down after being a long time in another culture is where you're going to build your bad memories.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you should go somewhere where you want to be happy. And so we were 4 years in Jersey, and then we went to Oklahoma, found a church that was just getting started. They needed a pastor to help the church grow, and that's how we ended up in Tahlequah.
Okay.
So, and when I announced it to the kids that we were going to Oklahoma, there was literally dancing and singing in the living room.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing.
I tend to
Yeah,
agree with them. I love Oklahoma.
yeah, yeah. Well, like I told you, my mom's side of the family would totally agree with you. Yeah,
Yeah,
we're all over Oklahoma. So,
yeah.
yeah. Well, and there, you have a Greene County Seed Savers Network. Can you tell me kind of about how that started and
Sure.
what y'all were doing?
Well, originally I got into Garden Web website, and it had a forum. It had several forums. I joined several forums, and I enjoyed Garden Web a great deal, but it changed hands twice from the time I got it till now. And um, I don't remember, I guess about 14 years ago, it changed again, and it became much less user friendly for gardeners. And at the same time, I was really feeling a burden to help other people become seed savers. And it just made me want to pull my hair out using that forum. We had an Oklahoma gardening forum, which was the bomb. It was wonderful, but I couldn't take it. So my wife and I were becoming more versed in stuff with the internet, and I decided I found a place where I could get a free forum and set it up. So I set up Green Country Seed Savers, and simultaneously was invited in this area to do several presentations about seed saving. And for a while, we had a huge amount of people coming out. I mean, I couldn't believe it. That has slowed down a bit because I've slowed down a bit.
Yeah.
But the forum on the internet has remained very strong.
Mhm.
And it's so much like intercultural work. You can't be impatient. You just want to keep encouraging people, pointing them the right way, giving them the right example, and slowly but surely they develop. And one of the themes that I try to promote with seed savers is don't just save seeds. You must multiply seed savers because
Mhm.
that's the future.
Yeah.
And new seed savers are going to be like kids or puppies. They make mistakes, they make messes, they don't get some things, but that's perfectly fine. You want to be like my parents were with the sandbox, you
Yeah.
know, just encourage them. So I've had people that say enthusiastically they want to be seed savers, and they're going to save Blue Lake pole beans or something like that.
Yeah.
And inside I'm thinking, of all things, but on the other hand, I'll just say, this is what you got to do because I want them to succeed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, and speaking of, passing that knowledge on, I know that you and Jerreth had a lot of folks to you coming wanting to learn about homesteading as well.
yeah, yeah.
Um, can you tell me a little bit about what that need was and how y'all were helping folks along with that?
Well, we had people come in all the time. We even had some young people to us in their 20s that actually asked to come and stay with us, sometimes for a month. And what's that? Couple months. She's my wife sitting here.
Yeah.
Couple
Oh, hey,
months.
Jerreth.
Yeah. And they would do help on the farm in exchange. Um, and it was good. We really enjoyed them. They were refreshing. They learned a lot. They were very grateful. But we realized can't keep doing this and can't do that many.
Yeah.
And then about that time, one of the young people that we had mentored came up with the idea. He said, you need to have a website and you can do online courses and you can help a lot more people. So we got into that, had not a great idea of all that we had to do that. It was
Mm.
that's a huge task.
Yeah.
And then we got together a team for webmaster and I was the principal subject matter expert and I don't remember everything. My daughter Emily was a specialty and my wife was a specialty in another area and we had some difficulties. Uh, Lost our webmaster and had troubles with staffing. And so
Mhm.
we did accomplish a great deal. And a side product of it was that my wife, Jerreth, jumped in and not only learned a lot about internet education, but got a master's degree
Oh, wow.
in it. And now she's employed in that for the university, teaching people, professors, how to get their stuff online effectively. So it was a big benefit to us, but it also taught us a tremendous amount about what you have to do to communicate. Because I had written little hand guides for people, and
Yeah.
when we started into the website, I suddenly found out, you know what? I was giving them a ladder to get to the top, but my ladder started at about 6 rungs up,
Mhm.
and they needed from the first rung.
Mhm.
And so literally they needed someone to say something like, this is a seed,
Yeah. Yep.
you know,
Yep.
and and they needed everything explained much more simply. And so it was good for us. Uh, and it also helped a lot of people, I think. We finally had to get out of it. I had memory issues that
Mm.
were making it difficult, and Google changed their um, I don't remember what you call it, but the way that people would search and find things, and it kind of
Mm.
killed our website.
Yeah. Yeah. Different analytics and whatnot. But yeah, it's kind of interesting turn with you, Jareth, that yeah, you never know which way the road's gonna turn. And there you went into something like that, trying to, figure one process out, took you down a long road, I guess, you know? Yep.
Yeah, a long road, but it's been a good one.
That's good. That's good. Well, kind of speaking of that, as I mentioned, y'all started listing on the exchange in 1985. You shared, so many varieties in the exchange community. Um, you know, that publication now offers, around 17,000 different unique varieties. And it's one of those publications that once people find it, they get lost. I'm like, all right, as soon as you get introduced, give yourself a couple days because you're not going to pull your head out of water for a while because there's a lot to explore. And it's just such a wonderful place, uh, which it's the public access, it's the doorway to the seed bank at Seed Savers Exchange. And then it's, hundreds of seed savers sharing their seeds, across the country. But what got you into the exchange? What was your first introduction to that, and
Hmm.
what got y'all listing seeds in the exchange?
Well, probably it started with my folks, especially my dad. And then we had friends in New Jersey, especially some Italian friends that gave us some seeds and for our Italian friends, they were second, third generation from Italy, but these were from the old country and it was really special when they shared it, the seed. And my dad loved that. He grew it, grew those things. And then he kind of stopped and I moved away to go to school. And for most of the time I was in school, I couldn't garden
Mm.
until master's degree. And then there was more opportunity to do that. And I was hungry to start growing some things that kind of went back to at least my roots
Mhm.
and uh and I was fascinated in my youth with all these different things and just fascinated with the variety. I remember Glecker's Seedsman was just amazing to me.
Mhm.
Um, so I started researching that, reading about it. I was a member of Gardens for All. Later, it was called National Gardening Association. That was a
Mhm.
big help. And that's probably where I first heard about seed savers.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't remember the exact time, but sometime in 1984, I remember deciding to join the Seed Savers. Probably it was after, I think it was 84, maybe it was 85, but they sent me, whoever was sending out the yearbook sent me the 84 uh, yearbook as a bonus. And that was just huge because I joined like in the middle of the summer.
Yeah.
And I just dog-eared that thing,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, so that's how I got in. And then quickly made many friends, not just among people that'd been there more than me, but people that requested stuff from me. We used to correspond all with letters
Mhm.
or phone calls.
Yeah.
And it was funny because there was one fellow in Oklahoma that I corresponded with a whole lot. I lost track of him. And then I went to Mexico and I was in Mexico and I came back and I was in the US for a few years. And one day I picked up one of those yearbooks and leafed through it and out popped an envelope with his address.
Oh, wow.
And so I wrote a letter and I said, "Are you still around?" And he wrote me back email. And he was all crippled up and all, but he
Sure.
actually sent me some seeds he'd had in his freezer since before I went to Mexico.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow.
yeah.
That's a good circle to get back into. Yeah, that's good. Love that. Yeah, can I ask you to talk a little bit about there's the Barksdale wax bean.
Yeah,
So that has a little intimate story and history with y'all. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that bean?
sure. By this, well, of course, by the time I got into Seed Savers, my wife Jerreth and I were married several years. And her family on her dad's side came from Southern Illinois in a rural area in Effingham County.
Mhm.
I think it's Effingham County,
Effingham, Illinois.
Effingham, Illinois,
Well, Salem.
Salem, Illinois. Anyway, her grandparents had lived through the Depression and they were all about growing a big garden every year. They had their whole backyard in a garden. And when Jerreth introduced me to them, they gave us a tour which either started or finished with their pantry, which was just gigantic with all the canned goods and all.
Mm.
And we hit it off great. I had hung out with Clarence Mauser all through my teenage years. And so I remember grandma and grandpa one time commenting about how I made such a good old man, even though I was in my 20s.
Old
And
soul.
yeah. And anyway, I guess I can't remember the exact year. We were in seminary and they presented us with some seed from Barksdale wax pole bean, which had been grown in the neighboring homestead when they had lived out in the country outside of Salem. And it had belonged to Claude Barksdale. They had just gotten the seed from a relative and they were all excited about sharing it. So I grew it in Winona Lake, Indiana. And it took a couple years, like more than a decade, to really start to learn that bean because I know I planted it late in Indiana. In Indiana, northern Indiana, regardless of what anyone there might say, has pretty mild summers compared to Oklahoma. But they do have a hot time. And I planted a little late, and the plants seemed kind of spindly and not that great. And then they just flowered sporadically, hardly got any beans. And I was thinking, well, that's a bummer. And then we had the first crisp fall days hit, and all of a sudden, whammo, they just turned covered in flowers, covered in beans, and big yellow flat beans, 1 inch wide. They're I would call them a string bean in that they're totally fiberless, but they're the only string bean I've ever met that generally doesn't have a string.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so we've grown that ever since.
Mm,
I've even figured out that I can grow it in Oklahoma.
nice.
It gets put in the ground in July.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah. So since it appreciates that cool fall.
yeah, you have to practically have it on IV drip in July.
Yeah, I
So
was gonna say. Yeah. Yeah.
it's worth it.
Yeah. Well, that kind of brings me, um, I know through the years you've worked with many varieties, but you've also made a point to um, just tell other seed savers, take your time with a variety,
Yeah,
spend some seasons with it, really get to know that variety. Yeah,
yeah.
can you kind of speak a little bit more on that philosophy of,
Oh,
true
yeah,
stewardship and
yeah,
understanding a variety?
sure. Today I was thinking about that, and there's an old Russian folk tale about a European guy that moves out to the steppe in the Caucasus Mountains, and he's going to take advantage of one of the tribal leaders and get a bunch of rich land for a little bit of money. And the tribal leader wisely says, gives him a ridiculously low price. He says, but you've got to walk, you have to get around the perimeter and mark the corners and be back here by sunset, or you don't get anything and I get the money. And the long and short of it is the guy is so greedy, he just keeps going farther and farther and farther. And in the end, he's running, running, running as fast as he can. And he dies of a heart attack short of the finish line. And that, in my mind, is a lot of seed savers when they start out.
Yeah.
They want everything and they don't
Yeah.
have time to get to know anything.
Yeah.
And and I remember when I was younger, maybe as late as my 30s, how I used to think there'd be nothing for a Christmas gift better than a new packet of beans, a new
Yeah.
variety or something. Oh, it was so
Yeah, buddy.
wonderful. And then somewhere along the line, all of a sudden it was like, wait a moment here. And then I'm at a point now when someone hands me something and says, here, keep this going. I'm like, I'll look for somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and and now I'm at a point in life where I'm having to cut back
Mm,
and I'm having to think what really matters.
mhm,
And I'm realizing I have some old friends that mean a lot to me, and
mhm,
I'm still getting to know them. Some of these beans, especially beans, you don't know them till you've grown them a minimum of 5 years, sometimes a decade. There's just so many things that happen.
mhm.
And also, I think it turns me off when people go stampeding after the latest fad. Somebody writes a nice article about a new heirloom they found or something, and and everybody's got to have it, um, and they ignore really good things, really good varieties that uh, would merit some care. And if we're preserving, we need to be preserving the things that are more obscure as well. So that's kind of where I'm at. But um, like I've mentioned Cherokee striped cornhill that I got from Tony West of the Appalachian Heirloom Plant Farm. I think that's what his business is called.
Mhm,
He at least was seed saver. I don't know if he still is
mhm.
with seed savers, but um, that bean is a lot like Barksdale. Um, only even more spectacular in some respects. And it's also, and I hate to say this because I've gotten to the point when I recommend something in Green Country Seed Savers, at least it's like everybody wants it. And I'm like, no, please don't drop what you've got for what I said. Okay. But the Cherokee Striped Cornhill is one of my favorites. And it's just one of the most persnickety specialized beans I've ever seen.
Mm,
And so, but if you didn't take years to get to know it, you would discard it.
Mm.
And yet the people that gave it to us probably carried it all the way from Central America and kept it for centuries.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. And think about those journeys,
yeah,
from center of origin through time, stewarded here and there,
yeah,
uh, really settling in certain locations. This one, presumably the Cherokee steward that for quite some time.
yeah,
But yeah, the change of hands and the change of climate and
yeah.
situations with a lot of these varieties. So,
I think I'm starting to get to where I start to recognize some of the earmarks of a plant that has made that transition from
mm,
the south to the north or the north to the south.
mm,
And I think I see that with Cherokee striped cornhill. So,
that's amazing. I got to admit, I'm starting to. I was like that. Just oh my God, what I had a seed swap out in Pikeville, Kentucky. Beans just falling from the mountains, in those swaps, and you're just like, oh my gosh, look at this. I want to grow that. I want to try that, or oh these squash, or this, or it's just. And then I turn around one day and I'm like, how will I ever grow all this?
yeah,
And I got to the place where as I'm going to different locations in the US, if I'm going to the Southwest or something, I look through my collection and I'm like, what belongs there? I need to bring it back there, or like who else would be better for this? Because and started to just kind of have some that I've kind of fallen in love with and continued to steward and grow and watch and eat. And
yeah,
I'm also trying to focus more on eating more because so many times, oh wait, you can't, that's for seed. No, you can't eat that, that's
right.
for seed.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You got to grow enough so that you can actually use it the way it was meant to and
Yeah,
not just save seed.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I've struggled with that, and I think as I'm turning 50, I'm getting better about, starting to be a little bit more intimate with some of these varieties that I've started to cherish through time. So, but yeah, it is. It's like getting a candy shop, once you get hooked on seed saving, you kind of want to try it all, and then you realize, well, you're limited by time and land and all that. So, and once you do spend some time with some varieties and get to know it, and I love how you say that they have quirks just like humans.
Yes, just like humans, and some of the quirkiest ones you would reject if you didn't make the time and effort to get to know them. And then when you do, they're the best.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
sometimes you can't judge somebody until you sit down at the table and spend a little time with them. You might
we
know.
actually had a seed saver in the Seed Savers Exchange in California. CRC something ABA. I can't remember, but he just introduced a plethora of new tomatoes and things like that. And I thought he was making it up because who could crank that stuff out so fast?
Yeah.
And on top of that, he never followed the rules.
Yeah.
You wouldn't send the necessary postage. You just send a bunch of these packets of seed.
Huh.
And I'm like, I was tossing them. I'm like, no
Yeah.
way. And so then it took about 10 years, and all of a sudden I started seeing people that grew those seeds, and they were
Yeah.
all, these are the best. This is amazing. And then I realized I was dealing with a genius.
Yeah. He was doing it, huh?
He was doing it, you
Wow.
know. So,
That's
but it's the
amazing.
same with the plants sometimes. You
Yeah.
know. A Barksdale would be a disaster for a new gardener because they would plant it and then give up on it before it could make a crop. Cherokee
Mhm.
striped cornhill, never going to make it in the commercial seed trade
Mm.
because you got to know exactly when to plant them. You got to know the changes in the growth habit according to when you plant them. If you
Mm.
plant them late enough, you can get a 3.5 to 4 foot vine that's loaded with beans. You plant it a few months earlier, you're going to get a behemoth that's going to go 20 feet and break poles that big around. And you just got to know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
no one's going to take that time.
Yeah. Yeah. I do tinker with planting times
Yeah,
also on some of these and just see what, the difference of when I plant something. So it'd be fun to be playful even within the same variety. You don't have to have a new variety just to be playful.
yeah.
You could be playful with the same variety.
Mhm.
You
And
know, and then that brings me to one of your other, your second points is, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about how you stress the importance of growing larger populations on
okay.
these varieties you're trying to preserve and
Yeah, well, um, I've become very convicted of that. First of all, where I live apparently is unique. We have a superabundance of native bees. I've looked up in a plum tree on a spring day when it's flowering, and for every European honeybee, there's 4 or 5 natives.
Mhm.
And I have 5 of my own beehives within 150 feet of there. So
Yeah.
they're everywhere. And
Mhm.
those bees work tomatoes, peppers, and beans.
Mhm.
And so I started getting massive amounts of crosses
Mhm.
because I used to follow the guidelines I did, which were the norm when I was a new seed saver, which even the Seed Savers Exchange has tightened up those things because they've learned over time.
Yep.
So I would get way too many crosses, and over the years, I just kept having to spread my stuff. I had room, I'd spread them further apart, and I've even had crosses with beans 40 feet apart. Um, and so at the same time, I've dealt with what you alluded to. Don't eat that, that's for seed. And
Mhm.
that's just not a good thing.
Yeah.
And so I just have kept reducing the numbers that I grow per year. My wife allowed me to have the entire freezer section of an upright refrigerator freezer. That's my seed storage.
Yep.
And I'm very quickly headed now to where that's the only seed I'll have is what's frozen.
Yeah.
Because if it isn't frozen, I can't find it and
Yeah.
it's gonna expire. But I just found I want to plant larger plantings and with beans, especially blocks of plantings. And I want to know that variety and I want to do right by it because it's so easy to corrupt them.
Mhm.
A slow trickle of cross pollination over time makes a big difference. And the same with squash. I've written about the Warsaw Buff Pie pumpkin. That's a
Yeah.
poster child to me because I got that seed when I was brand new at seed saving. I was enamored with pumpkin shapes, and this was a multi-shaped mix. And right off the bat, I did hand pollination because as fast as I could learn because I was surrounded by other gardeners. And I just automatically chose round, round, round. And by the time I left Mexico, I had an all round or triangular shaped strain of Warsaw Buff Pie pumpkin.
Mhm.
And then I was able to get the seed from my friend in Oklahoma for the other, but I kept selecting. And then in around 2014, I lost all of my seed. And when Sarah, I can't remember her last name, a historian,
Sarah Strati. Yeah.
yeah, Strati,
Mhm.
she came and visited us. I can't remember people's names. There was another young lady with her. They came, they brought me some seed of the Warsaw Buff Pie pumpkin. I got it in really late, but it grew and it started to produce. And I was like, oh no, that's not Warsaw Buff Pie pumpkin. That is not it. That's crossed. And I was even sure that it was Tromboncino had been crossed with.
Oh, yeah.
And so corresponding more, they sent me some of the 1986 seed, which is first or second generation from the seed I sent,
Mhm.
maybe.
Yeah.
I never did bother to ask where they got the seed, but it's got to be first or second generation. And when it grew out, it had a lot of shapes, a lot more shapes, variation in it. And yet, as spent time in the garden working around it and looking at it, I take a lot of pictures now. That's because of the website we used to have. I
Mhm.
take a lot of notes on a tablet and all. I began to realize, this is the Warsaw Buff Pie pumpkin. It fits within the parameters. It's just way more diverse.
Mm.
And I got to thinking, which is more valuable, what I selected or what I started with? And I thought, for preservation's sake, the original mix is way more important
Yeah.
because I can reselect. I don't have enough lifetime probably left to do that, but I could reselect and get anything back
Mhm.
if I have the original mix.
Yeah.
And the only way I see they really do an effective job with that is isolation and natural cross-pollination. Because even with the seed that I've been growing out for the Renew program, I find that when I'm cutting squash and saving seed, I am so tempted to save more seed of the ones I like,
Right.
but that's not fair.
Yeah. It's not fair to the other shapes.
No, it's not fair. And so I throw it all together. And for the next couple of years, I've just committed, I'm going to just save from everything. And then when we got lots of seed that's true to the original, then we might relax and do some more experimenting, but we need to keep the original.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna have you talk about one more variety,
Mhm.
and then I'm gonna stop hindering you here. But um, you worked with the Tennessee cut short a little bit,
Yeah, yeah.
and so I've had a little bit of exposure with my good friend here in Tennessee. Yeah, tell me about your journey or your time with the Tennessee cut short, and I think there's a story where the Cherokee Trail of Tears jumps in there too, if I'm not
Yeah, oh
mistaken.
yeah. I got a lot of stories with that bean. Anyway, we got the seed from them like the next year after we got the seed from the Barksdales. In fact, we were visiting them and Grandma and Grandpa said, let's go see Aunt Clara and Uncle Doy. And so we drove out there. It was a frosty October morning, and they introduced me to Aunt Clara and Uncle Doy as Jerreth's husband. He loves old seeds, and they all brightened up, and they said, "Well, come on out to the garden." So I went out to the garden. They had these little stick teepees with dead, dried bean plants on it. And they said, this is the bean we've been growing. I forget for how long. They got it from, I can't remember, can't keep it straight at the moment, but I have it written down. They got it from some relative and they've been growing it all their lives, I think. Um, and they handed me an old nylon, like a woman's nylon, calf high thing. And they said, here, get you some beans. So I walked out there and I shelled beans and filled that little sack. And at that point, that was like treasure. To me, it was really treasure. And I'd never seen a bean that was so round
Yeah.
compared, because I had grown up with Kentucky Wonder being the most primitive of all beans.
Mhm.
And Blue Lake, my dad grew Blue Lake a lot. And so I got that, and um, I didn't even have I don't think I even had a chance to grow it in Indiana. I might have, but I can't recall. I gave seed to my dad, and he planted it the year we moved from Indiana, and he grew it in his garden, and he let me plant quite a long row of it. I was very excited, very impressed, but I didn't know anything about real string beans.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I had always left the tips on my beans before. And I remember telling my wife, we're going to leave the tips on. And when we ate our first batch, it was like, ooh, these things are hard. You know, it took
Yeah.
a couple years to learn how the original people had always treated those beans, everyone that had raised them before us. And so we grew that. We grew it in Mexico, grew it in Jersey, Indiana. I don't remember where else. Might have grown it in Texas. Um, and it's just been a family thing. I would grow them in Barksdale, and I always explained to the kids when they were growing up, these belong to your grandparents, your great aunt. Learned a lot of things about old timers and seed saving too, because grandma and grandpa lived about 10 minutes away from Aunt Claire and Uncle Doy. And it never occurred to either of them to exchange seeds.
Oh my gosh.
Um, they just had their beans, never
Yeah.
occurred to them. And if something new came along, they would drop them.
Yeah.
They would lose them.
Mm.
You know, like I got Georgia long cowpea from the Johnsons up in Missouri around 85. And I remember giving some seed of that to grandma and grandpa's. And they grew it. They liked it so much that 5 years later I went back and I asked about Barksdale and they said, "Oh, we lost that seed. We just grow these Georgia
Yeah.
long." And I was like, "You're kidding me."
Yeah.
So I learned a lot. Anyway, in 2016, when the exchange sent people down to interview us, I planted a lot of Tennessee cut short in rows that year. And the year before, a Cherokee friend had given me um, a flat of sprouted Cherokee Trail of Tear beans.
Mm.
I just about didn't know what to do with a flat of sprouted beans.
Yeah.
To me, it's like that's heresy. You plant them from seed, you
Yeah.
know.
Right.
And so I remember I didn't want to offend her or lose the variety, so I stuck them in the ground. They were a little too close to Tennessee cut short in 2015. 2016, I grew them out. And as I'm walking down the road taking pictures, I noticed that I had 4 plants of Tennessee cut short with lavender flowers, which is not Tennessee cut short.
Hmm.
And I made a choice right then because I was like, Cherokee Trail of Tears, it has to be it. They have beautiful lavender flowers, and I thought, well, I'm going to let them go, and I'll rogue out any crosses after this year, but I'm going to try growing these. So I experimented with growing them out, and I have that documented pretty well on this Green Country Seed Savers website. But it just absolutely mind-boggling what comes out of a cross. Especially, I think you've got two old varieties. I think Cherokee Trail of Tears has been narrowed down a lot in different seed sources because I've heard friends that have Cherokee Trail of Tears, and what they tell me doesn't sound like mine. I think mine came from Abundant Life seeds at one point because they're really tender,
Yeah.
and I don't think the original strain was as tender. I
Right.
think it was a mix. But
Hmm.
anyway, F1 generation, uniform, pretty uniform. Um, Looked like Tennessee cut short, but not quite exactly the same. All jet black, shiny seed, beautiful round seed, not quite as tender a pod as Tennessee cut short.
Mm.
So I thought, well, that's F1. And I replanted them. I replanted them, I don't know how many years, but F2, F3, F4 generations, it was like somebody took a big metal ladle and stirred up the pot of the genes, and
Wow.
everything that was in the background popped out. I saw
Wow.
beans pop out of there that looked a lot like beans I saw in rural, really remote villages in Mexico.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
they were tough pods, they were hard pods, there were tender pods, there were string beans, there were flat, there were crease back, there were round, there were shapes I've never heard described. And I have a bunch of them in my freezer and probably will never have time to grow them all out because
Mm.
every one of those would probably take at least 10 years or 12 years to stabilize, and you got to decide what's your target.
Yeah.
Could fill up the whole county with all the variety. So, but I learned a lot about it, and I also figured out with some of these crosses that some of these old bean varieties we have are not descended just from one bean
Hmm.
necessarily. And so you actually have different genetics in the mix. And so you cross them and then you don't even get completely the same F1 generation.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of value in that genetic material.
Well, yeah, that's fun, and when I talk to folks, and they want to know about seed saving and purity and all that, and of course we talk about that, but it's okay to be playful too out in the garden,
It
as long
is.
as it's not grandma's last 5 seeds, that you're that you're gonna get crossed up, if you got plenty, go ahead and be playful and see what you come up
Absolutely.
with.
and you never know what you're gonna come up with, you
Yeah.
know? So, you know, if there wasn't a bean that came out of that cross, none of those generations did I find a bean that I'm like, "Well, that stinks." They
Yeah.
were
Right.
they were all different,
Yeah.
but they were really good. Some of those that were definitely just for dry beans, would have made a phenomenal dry bean because they were sturdy pods, they protected the bean, they were easy to shell. Um, and frankly, to my thinking, they looked great, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's fun.
yeah.
That's real fun.
But
I
you can
love
see
that.
why in Appalachian culture, for instance, every little holler would have their own
Yeah.
bean because somebody be growing the beans they got from their Aunt Clara. And
Yeah.
then there might be a cross or there might be some sort of a change. And they're like, I like that. And then they have a whole lifetime to work on it,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And so all that work, we got to keep going, we got to,
yeah,
yeah, got to keep all those genetics and keep all those histories and,
yeah.
all that, yeah, fine work that our ancestors did going. And George, this has been fascinating. I could probably keep you on here for the rest of the evening. We can carry on.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I think we've run our time. But it's just been an honor and a pleasure to finally get to sit down with you and talk and hear firsthand some of the stories that I've read through time. And can't thank you enough for all the work that you've done and not only in seed saving but inspiring other seed savers to continue to keep these heritage seeds going.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, what a pleasure. Uh, Thanks for this. I know the audience is gonna love this. So
All right. Well, thanks, Michael. I've enjoyed it.
yeah.